Hey, what's happening, everybody? I'm Tom, and you are watching Cortex Zero. So this video is going to be very different than the content that I've been creating for the last year or two. Not really planning on doing any real editing here, except for maybe some jump cuts here and there for time. And this is a serious topic for me personally. No music. I didn't even really want to put my intro on this video because, again, it's just I want everybody to be laser focused on the story as they're watching this. And I have been waiting a long time to do what I'm doing here right now. I've had this story in my back pocket for 16 years. It was shared with me in 2006. I believe it was August of 2006 specifically. And at the time, I was just 16 years old. I didn't know what the potential repercussions were going to be if I shared this, because when you hear the details of the story, you'll understand the conundrum that I found myself in, even at that young age. Because when someone tells you something like this and you believe it to be genuine, you don't want to put anybody in harm's way. You don't want to get anyone that you care about in any kind of trouble. But because of recent events and some of the things that have been unfolding with the phenomenon, specifically dating back to 2017, I've decided that it's time to share this. And I think everything will be all right. And again, I had said this on Twitter, and shout out to everyone on UFO Twitter. You guys are absolutely fantastic, just amazing people. I love talking to you guys every day. You're the best. I said on Twitter that I was hoping that this would ring some bells, and that maybe somebody would recognize this story. And again, can I prove that this actually happened? The story itself? No. But was it actually told to me? Yes. Yes, it was. I'm willing to do whatever is possible to prove that this was actually shared with me. I don't know what I can do at this point. The most I could really do is contact that individual and see if there's anything they're willing to say. Again, I don't know if they'll do that. I doubt it. It might be a bad idea. It's confusing for me. It's a complicated situation. This is the craziest thing anyone's ever told me. And it's time to talk about it. It's time to share it. And I need to know if this really happened by putting it out into the ether here and hoping that somebody will recognize it, somebody will pick up on it, some details, and maybe some level of justice will be served also. I mean, there's a lot of different implications involved with this particular story. And again, I don't expect every person that watches this video to believe any of this. I get that. Everybody's different. However, I just want to say to the camera while I'm here that this happened. This was shared with me when I was 16 years old. And I've thought about it nearly every day since. So before I begin the story, one last thing. I was going through one of my old email addresses the other day. I was actually looking for a couple different things that I thought may be in there, and I hadn't logged into this address in years. I found a script that I had written in regards to this story for a YouTube video that I was going to do about this in 2016 when I first started my YouTube channel. I was going to talk about this, and then I decided against it. This was typed up so that I could read it in a video and tell the story. When I had typed this up, I had put in just about every last detail that I could think of to be able to accurately portray this particular story to whoever would watch the video. I have an app that's kind of like a teleprompter that I downloaded so that I can just read it right on my screen while still basically being able to make eye contact with the camera. And I am going to read what I typed back in 2016. And then, obviously, throughout, I might throw in some extra details, some things that may have arisen in my own mind since I had typed this up. But here we go. I'm going to tell the story. And I hope that something comes of it that has a positive outcome. As of today, I don't think I've told more than 3 people what I'm about to share with all of you. But I've decided that I should, and the purpose of me doing so is to perhaps gain some new insight into the incident, in the hopes that maybe somebody will contact me who may have some answers, because I have a lot of questions, and I think you will too. Everything that I'm going to say is the absolute truth. No hyperbole, no revisionism. It's just the story as I remember it. Back when I was between 16 and 17 years old, and I'm now 33, I was in a long-term relationship with a girl who, for the purpose of identity protection, I will refer to as Becky. Given that she and I were together for a while, I grew close to her family. Becky's father, who I'll call Dave, was a very intelligent, friendly, and overall sincerely good person. It's essentially impossible for me to say anything negative about him, which is an important detail that I would like you to make note of. This was an individual who just didn't make things up. He was always honest about everything, and he backed that up. Take it from me, I was around him consistently for years. He was no bullshitter. From the first day that I met Dave, I immediately recognized that he was someone who just understood the world in a way that few people who I have met have. Having a science degree and a respectable background in various studies, Dave was someone who I could sit down with and really speak at length with about things like time travel, string theory, quantum physics, and other related topics. One day, while Becky and I were spending time together at her house, Dave called us both into the kitchen after overhearing our conversation regarding extraterrestrial life, and whether or not the Roswell crash was a cover-up of some kind. Once we made our way into the kitchen, Dave told us to both take a seat, took a deep breath, looked at Becky and said, "I've been waiting a long time to tell you about this." At this moment, I knew something big was approaching, and as I recognized this reality, Dave turned his attention to me and asked what I thought about the prospect of there being life elsewhere in the vast universe, to which I replied with my customary viewpoint of the cosmos being too large to not harbor life aside from that of the Earth, among other ideas. Dave received my answer very well and told me that it sounded as though I had done my homework on the matter at hand. After getting the groundwork out of the way, Dave's expression became much more serious than it had already been, almost grievous. His eyes were now fixated on the drawing that I had done of a conventional gray alien life form, which I had drawn amidst my discussion with Becky and gave to her sister as a gift. Dave's gaze returned to me. And that's when things went from curious to sobering. It's been years since this all took place, so I'm going to retell everything Dave told as best as I can. The following is in Dave's words. I just wanted to clarify that so no one gets confused. Just a quick side note. When I got back to my house that night, I took out a notebook and I wrote down everything that I could remember about this particular conversation. And then, I kept it, and years later, I was able to basically type up what I had written, and that's what you're about to hear. This is from the perspective of Dave. I once had a cousin who, in this story, we will refer to as Chris, who I was very close with, that had a job working for one of the alphabet agencies that I will not name. We used to drink together, talk about all sorts of crazy things, much of which came from him, but it wasn't anything that was out of the question. It was always something that had some possibility of being real. There was a day where my cousin stopped by the house Becky's mother and I used to live in, and it was obvious that he wasn't himself. He was clearly anxious and just way out of order. When Becky's mother left to pick something up from the store, Chris explained that he needed to talk to me about something in private and pulled me into the back room, which he nervously insisted on that being where we spoke about it. Instead of sitting down, Chris began to pace back and forth, staring at the floor, waving his hands around as he spoke. He told me that he was at a military base in Michigan, probably an Air Force base, and was present during an emergency lockdown of the base. With a high security clearance, few would really question him, but on this day, it was the opposite. And he said he was feeling more like a civilian than a member of his agency. Won't say who or how, but my cousin ended up in a room with a handful of medical personnel and what would more than likely be very high-ranking military officials, and saw one of those, like what you drew. As he said this, Dave pointed directly at the gray I had drawn. Injured and likely dying, but alive, on a table surrounded by glass, like a big incubator. My cousin told me a lot more, but I am afraid to tell anyone, and I really mean that. I don't think I can, especially after what happened to Chris. Once Dave said that, I knew what was coming next, but I still couldn't believe what I was hearing. He went on. Not even a week later, Chris was killed in a car accident, and people within the family were whispering about it being staged. Once Dave said that, I knew what was coming next, but I still couldn't believe what I was hearing. He went on. Not even a week later, Chris was killed in a car accident, and people within the family were whispering about it being staged. So I think it's possible he may have told a few more people than he should have. I think even telling just me may have gotten him killed. But I don't really know for certain why people were saying that, because I never had anyone to this day approach and tell me that he had given them the same story. Another thing that stuck out in my mind was the fact that the newspaper report only mentioned my cousin by name. They wouldn't even say who the driver of the other car was. The only thing that the article said about them was that they didn't survive, and that the family of this driver requested they remain anonymous. I mean, who does that? There has to be a reason, and I think it's because that driver wasn't dead to begin with. They killed my cousin, and they got away with it. They murdered him because of what he knew and what he had said. As we were sitting at the table with Dave, he began to become emotional. And thinking back to it, it's one of the weirdest moments of my life. Here was this grown man. At the time, he was in his 40s, with tears rolling down his face as he's telling me this story. And, you know, the whole time I'm expecting him to suddenly pop up and say, "Hey, gotcha. I'm just messing around, guys." And he didn't do that. He didn't do that at all. This was fucking serious. He wasn't kidding. Why would someone do that if they were lying? That's a question I have. Why would he have taken the time to tell this story and make himself cry? It's because he probably didn't. It's because he was telling the truth. And this story made him very emotional. These are the details from the story that I really, really want you to pay attention to, because I directly referenced what I'm about to say in my tweets, but obviously you had nothing to connect them to because I hadn't told the story yet. When Dave was telling us this story, he said there were details that he couldn't say. So in my 16-year-old mind, but I would probably come to this same conclusion even now, I'm like, hey, you just told me that you had a cousin that worked for a government agency that was killed for talking about seeing an extraterrestrial or whatever that being was, a non-human entity. He told you this, and they killed him for it. But there's more? There's what what part of the story is missing. He said that he wasn't killed for what he had just told me. Dave said that the story that he had just given us wasn't the part of the story that got his cousin killed. So I'm like, what's missing? Your cousin saw a living alien being of some kind at a military installation. But you know what I mean? This is what's bothered me for so many years, and this is really why I wanted to talk about it, aside from the fact that I believe an innocent individual was murdered for speaking out about something that he couldn't possibly keep to himself at that point, because that's just how some people are when they hear these types of things. And Dave said, I don't know if I can ever tell anyone that part of the story. Not even on my deathbed. What does that mean? What? They had a live alien being. And that wasn't the part that caused the trouble? It's always frustrated me knowing that there's this other chunk that's missing that was the actual source of the issue. He also mentioned the fact that from what his cousin could gather, they weren't sure where this being actually came from, and they were trying to establish communication with it. But again, that wasn't what got him killed, apparently. There was something else that Chris had shared with Dave about this story that he absolutely refused to speak about. Just would not go there at all. And I remember him saying that it would have absolutely shattered the way that I look at everything. He said it life-changing information, whatever it was.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any information regarding the story that I shared, please feel free to get in contact with me through any of my social media platforms or through my email.